Before we dive into this unsettling tale of mystery, secrets, and unexpected danger in the Old West, make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. What you're about to hear is more than just a Western, it's a chilling account of trust, betrayal, and something buried in plain sight. It begins with a man who lived alone by choice. A man whose silence kept others at bay. A man known only as Elijah, the black rancher who feared no one. He had fought through war, drought, and loss. His land was dry, his eyes sharper than a hawk's, and his gun always clean. Elijah didn't take in strangers. He didn't share fires or offer handshakes. That is, until a man covered in bee stings knocked on his door with a request that would change everything. The man called himself Harlan, a beekeeper from the east. Said he'd been traveling west in search of fresh land, clear air, and wild blossoms for his bees. He had crates full of buzzing hives strapped to a small wagon and a smoker hanging from his belt. Elijah wasn't a fan of visitors, but something about the man's calm voice and swollen hands made him pause. He offered water, then shade. Within an hour, Elijah did something he hadn't done in years. He invited the man to stay, just for a few nights, he told himself. A few nights turned into weeks. But there was something off about Harlan. Something Elijah couldn't quite name. Harlan was quiet, polite, and never asked too many questions. He spent his mornings tending the hives, gently brushing bees from the combs like a father waking his children. He sold jars of honey in town and gave Elijah a cut, even though Elijah never asked for it. By all accounts, he was the perfect guest. But every night, Harlan would walk out into the fields long after sunset, sometimes with a lantern, sometimes with a shovel. He said he was checking the bees. But Elijah knew bees didn't need tending in the dark. That's when the questions began. Elijah had seen men hide things before: money, moonshine, shame. But never under a hive. He watched from his porch some nights, the rifle across his lap. Harlan never looked back, never spoke, just wandered between the boxes, digging, rearranging, mumbling to himself. One morning, Elijah walked out to find fresh dirt near the hives, soft, dark, and recently turned. He didn't ask. Harlan didn't explain. But tension began to brew in the air like storm clouds thick with secrets. Then came the rain. A sudden downpour that soaked the land and loosened the soil. That night, Elijah noticed something strange. One of the hives had shifted, tilted slightly to one side. In the mud beneath it, something metallic glinted under moonlight. He didn't move it. Not yet. He waited until Harlan rode into town the next day. Then, with steady hands and cautious steps, Elijah lifted the hive, brushed the bees away, and began to dig. What he uncovered wasn't gold. It wasn't weapons. It was something far darker. A small wooden box, sealed tight and lined with wax. Elijah opened it slowly, expecting documents, maybe valuables. But inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Black and white, curled at the edges, all of the same woman, sometimes smiling, sometimes terrified, sometimes bound. And beneath the photos, a lock of hair. Elijah staggered back. He had seen many things in war, but this was something else. The kind of horror that made a man question who he was letting into his home. When Harlan returned, Elijah was waiting on the porch. His eyes didn't blink. His hand rested on the rifle. "You forget something under them hives?" he asked calmly. Harlan froze. His lips tightened. The air thickened. "You shouldn't ve looked," Harlan said, voice barely above a whisper. Elijah stood slowly. "And you shouldn't ve come here," he replied. But before he could lift the rifle, Harlan dropped to his knees, sobbing. He said it wasn't what Elijah thought. That the woman was his sister. That he was trying to forget, not remember. The story spilled out like poison. His sister had vanished 10 years ago, taken by a man who'd posed as a lawman. When the body was found, the authorities buried her with a number, no name. Harlan had tracked the killer for years, but he died before Harlan could reach him. So, he buried the evidence beneath the hives. Said it kept the pain quiet. Elijah didn't know if he believed the story, but he believed the grief. He'd seen the same kind in the mirror. Still, the ranch wasn't a sanctuary for ghosts or vengeance. The following days were silent. Harlan didn't tend the bees. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Elijah watched him carefully. The man was unraveling. He spoke to himself more, took long walks with the box under his arm, said he couldn't let it go, couldn't bury her again, not properly. Elijah offered to take him to town, to speak to the marshal. But Harlan shook his head. They won't listen, he muttered. They never listened before. Then one night, Elijah woke to the smell of smoke. He rushed outside to find the hives on fire, flames dancing through the fields like devils at a funeral. Harlan stood in the center of it, holding the open box to the sky, ashes swirling around him. "She's free now," he shouted. "She's finally free." Elijah pulled him from the flames, tackled him to the ground. The man was laughing, crying, babbling names and prayers and curses. And in that moment, Elijah realized Harlan hadn't come to raise bees. He'd come to bury guilt, and maybe himself. The next morning, the rancher rose early, as he always did. He fed the horses and checked the fences before heading toward the hives. But something was off. The bees were more agitated than usual, buzzing in thick clouds that didn't disperse even as the sun climbed higher. When he looked closer, he noticed fresh dirt. Someone had been digging near the base of the hives. He turned sharply toward the bunkhouse, suspicion now twisting in his gut like a snake. What was this beekeeper really doing here? And what had he hidden in plain sight, right under the nose of a man who trusted only the land? Instead of confronting the beekeeper directly, the rancher decided to watch. That night, he pretended to be asleep, waiting until the moon hung high and bright. Just past midnight, he saw movement, low, careful, deliberate. The beekeeper walked out of the bunkhouse with a shovel in one hand and a small oil lamp in the other. The rancher followed from a distance, keeping to the shadows. When the beekeeper reached the hives, he looked around, then knelt down, digging where the soil had already been loosened. The rancher's eyes narrowed as something shiny reflected in the lantern's glow. The rancher crept closer, silent as a hunting cat. He watched as the beekeeper pulled out a small metal box from beneath the earth. It looked old, covered in rust and dirt, but solid. The beekeeper opened it, revealing stacks of worn documents, strange medallions, and what looked like gold coins. The rancher felt his pulse quicken. What was this? Treasure? Secrets? Whatever it wasn't honey. And it sure wasn't legal. The beekeeper looked around nervously, then closed the box and reburied it. The rancher stepped back into the dark, now certain this stranger brought more than bees to his land. At dawn, the rancher greeted the beekeeper as usual, offering him coffee like nothing had changed. But under the surface, trust had shattered. He needed answers. So, in a calm but firm voice, he asked, "What exactly are you hiding under those hives, mister?" The beekeeper froze. His hand trembled slightly as he set down the cup. After a long silence, he spoke. "It's not mine," he said quietly. "It belonged to a man I used to know, a man who died for what's in that box." The rancher folded his arms. "Keep talking." Because now, things had gone from strange to downright dangerous. The beekeeper sighed, looking out toward the horizon. "Years ago, I was part of a group trying to preserve the truth, things that were stolen, covered up. That box, it holds records, names, and relics that prove it. I've been running ever since, hiding it where no one would think to look. And bees? They're the perfect guards. Most folks are too scared to go near them. The rancher narrowed his eyes. You brought heat to my land without telling me? The beekeeper nodded slowly. I didn't know where else to go. The rancher rubbed his jaw. Now we've got a problem. News traveled fast in the West, especially when it came to gold, secrets, or blood. That night, a single rider appeared on the ridge. No name, no words, just a figure in black watching from a distance. The rancher spotted him through his spyglass and felt the tension rise. You expecting someone? He asked the beekeeper. The man paled. If he's here, others are coming. They know. The rancher walked inside and loaded his rifle. Then they better be ready. This is my land. And I don't back down. The wind howled through the valley like a warning. The next day, a group of 5 men arrived on horseback, dust rising behind them like smoke. Their leader dismounted slowly, scanning the ranch like a vulture sizing up a carcass. We're looking for something, he said, voice calm but laced with threat. The rancher stepped forward, rifle slung across his chest. Ain't nothing here but bees and bad attitudes. The man smiled thinly. Then you won't mind if we take a look. The rancher stood firm. You cross this fence without my say, and you'll meet the same fate as a rattler in my boot. Silence. Then tension crackled like lightning. That night, the rancher and the beekeeper reinforced the barn, boarded up the windows, and set lanterns along the perimeter. They were outnumbered, but the rancher had something better than numbers: home turf, grit, and nothing to lose. The beekeeper handed him a worn revolver. This was his, he said. The man who died protecting the box. The rancher took it, nodding once. Then we'll make sure he didn't die for nothing. As darkness swallowed the land, the hum of bees merged with the silence of men preparing for a siege. The ranch had become a fortress. Shots rang out just before dawn. The attackers came fast and silent, like ghosts in the fog. But the rancher was faster. One man dropped before he hit the porch. Another was driven off by a swarm of furious bees, his screams echoing through the valley. The rancher moved with precision, defending his home with the same fire he once used to tame the wild land. The beekeeper stayed close, guarding the hives and the buried box. For every man that crossed the fence, another fell or fled. By sunrise, only the wind remained, and bodies scattered like broken promises. When the dust settled, the rancher stood at the gate, blood on his sleeve, eyes sharp as ever. The beekeeper walked up beside him, holding the box. They'll come again, he said. The rancher nodded. Then we'll be ready. But in that moment, something deeper had changed. The land had witnessed another secret, another chapter carved into its soil. The bees buzzed calmly again, their task complete. And beneath them, buried once more, was a truth too dangerous to tell, but too sacred to destroy. The rancher had offered shelter, but found purpose. And maybe, just maybe, redemption. The next morning, the rancher noticed something unsettling. The bees were unusually agitated, swarming in a spiral above the hives as if disturbed by something underground. He approached with caution, calling out to Elijah, but received no answer. He peeked into the shed where Elijah normally kept his equipment, only to find it empty, the suit hanging like a ghost in the wind. Tracks in the dirt led away from the ranch and into the hills, deep and fast, like a man running from more than just bees. The rancher followed the trail, feeling the weight of suspicion grow heavier with every step. Elijah had brought more than honey to this ranch, that much was now clear. What he left behind might have been far more dangerous than anyone had guessed. In the distance, a sharp metallic glint caught the rancher's eye, half buried beneath an overturned hive. He approached the object with a mix of dread and determination. It was a box, rusted yet solid, with carvings in a language he didn't understand etched along the sides. The lid had been slightly pried open, just enough to see a thick bundle of documents and bones. Human bones. Panic clutched at his throat, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew then that Elijah hadn't been guarding bees. He'd been guarding a secret grave. The rancher carried the box to the barn, locking the doors behind him. Night fell quickly, and with it came unease, like eyes were watching him from every tree. He needed answers, but the only man who had them had vanished into the wild. Determined not to let the mystery die in silence, the rancher opened the box fully and sorted through its contents. What he found was a mix of old maps, Confederate military insignias, and coded messages written in strange ink. There was a name repeated across several letters: Langston. He didn't know who Langston was, but Elijah clearly did. Among the papers was a photo of a man standing beside a buried trunk with the same markings as the box. The landscape in the photo was unmistakable. It was taken right there, on the ranch, years ago. Elijah hadn't chosen this place by chance. He had returned to a crime scene, a forgotten betrayal buried under decades of silence. The rancher spent that night reading every word in those documents. He pieced together a story of stolen gold, a betrayal between soldiers, and a massacre covered up by those sworn to serve. Elijah had been a child when it happened, hidden away by his mother while soldiers took the lives of innocent men to protect a secret stash of Confederate treasure. That treasure, according to one letter, was still somewhere beneath the hives. Elijah had come not just to watch over bees, he'd come to dig up the truth. The rancher understood now. The burden Elijah carried wasn't just survival, it was justice. And maybe, just maybe, vengeance. The next morning, determined to find the full truth, the rancher returned to the hives and began digging. He worked for hours, sweat soaking his shirt, bees buzzing like angry spirits around him. At last, his shovel struck something hard. He knelt and brushed away the dirt. It was a second, larger box, this one sealed with iron clamps. When he finally pried it open, his breath caught in his chest. Inside was gold, bars, coins, and weapons etched with names and dates from over a century ago. Alongside the treasure were more bones, and one final note in Elijah's handwriting: "This is not a treasure. It is a tomb." The rancher sat beside the box for a long time, processing what he'd uncovered. He thought of Elijah, not just as a beekeeper, but as a man tormented by a truth no one had believed, a boy who'd watched horror unfold and had come back as a man to reclaim dignity for the dead. The rancher decided he couldn't keep the gold. This wasn't his story to profit from. It belonged to the past, and to those who had been silenced. He gathered the remains and placed them in a proper coffin. With solemn hands, he gave the dead a burial they had never received, far away from the buzz of bees and bloodied history. News of the strange discovery spread fast, and soon government agents, historians, and reporters arrived. But the rancher refused to reveal the exact location of the gold. He only spoke of the men who had died unjustly, and the man who had come to remember them. Elijah was still gone, but his message had been delivered. Justice, in some small way, had found its voice. The land grew quiet again, the bees returning to their hum, the ranch to its stillness. But the rancher had changed. He was no longer just a man who lived alone with horses and fences. He had become a guardian of memory. Months later, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photo: Elijah, standing beside a modest grave marked "Truth." No name, no dates, just that one word. The rancher smiled, tucking the letter into the pocket of his coat. Elijah was still out there, watching, remembering. And maybe, when the time was right, he'd return. Until then, the rancher continued his work, tending the land, keeping the bees, and telling the story of the man who arrived with honey, but carried history in his shadow. The world had forgotten, but the land remembered. The rancher built a small monument near the old hive stands. Not grand, not loud, just stone and wood, carved with the same word from Elijah's letter: truth. Visitors would stop and ask about it, and he would tell them the story, not of treasure, but of memory, pain, and redemption. It became a place of quiet reflection, where the past and present met under the wide skies. A place where one black rancher, one beekeeper, and the weight of untold history finally found peace. And as the wind carried the sound of buzzing bees across the plains, he knew that some stories had to be lived to be believed. If this story moved you, if it made you stop and think about what might be buried in the past, not just gold, but truth, then consider subscribing to this channel. Every tale we share is a piece of a greater memory that refuses to die. Comment below your thoughts, and share this video with someone who still believes in justice, even when it's buried deep. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and never stop digging for what's right.